Professor Kafatos received his BA in physics from Cornell University in 1967 and PhD in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1972. After postdoctoral work at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, he joined George Mason University and was university professor of interdisciplinary sciences from 1984 to 2008. He also served as Dean of the School of Computational Sciences and was Director, Center for Earth Observing and Space Research. He has 34 years' experience and has published numerous books, including The Conscious Universe, The Non-Local Universe, along with Robert Nadeau, Principles of Integrative Science with Mihai Dragonescu, and has more than 250 articles to his credit on various subjects, including astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology, quantum theory, brain science, consciousness, earth system science, remote sensing, and data systems. Today, he speaks on the mystery of the self. Dr. Menas Kafatos.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. So, what is the self? What is the self? It is so close and so distant, so near us and so far away. And today, if you permit me, we'll take a little trip to the edges of the universe, but we're going to come back to where it really matters, our own being, our own center of being. I'll go through some of these slides. Some of you saw them my last workshop. I do apologize for the repetition, but I think so that everybody is on the same page, let's go through some of them. So the amazing hypothesis I'm proposing here is the view which is uncompromising. The current paradigm that we live in, that is mesmerizing the entire world, is the view of external reality, that somehow all there is something out there. It's an uncompromising view. It's quite dogmatic. Kingdoms are built on it. Empires are built on it. Today's entire scientific paradigm is built on it. And it's causing a lot of problems in the world. I'm proposing an uncompromising view of the unity of consciousness. The unity that the mystics and the ancient rishis talked about and lived, and which we find here in this great surrounding. Because I believe, from what I've seen, this is also the vision here. Underlying universal consciousness operates at every level of reality. Not some and some others, no. In every level, every single level of reality. This is the uncompromising part. It's either all-encompassing or it is not. You can't have it both ways. It is the fundamental I-ness, the gift that God gave us from the very first day we're born to the very last day of our lives. It is really the only experience that we truly have. Everything else is an illusion, as the ancient rishis, again, talked about. Through a series of fundamental principles, and I will go through it, what universal consciousness does is project out onto itself through a series of steps using complementary object-subject relationships. And I will develop that a little bit for you and for us. And this is why quantum theory is so relevant, because it gives us hints to these underlying principles, such as complementarity. So the object-subject apparent division, which is so paradoxical, springs out of universal consciousness. Qualia, which I will develop a little bit, and in fact, my good friend Deepak Chopra will say a lot more and will give you some experience this afternoon, give rise to all levels of subjective experience. And finally, this vision allows us a connection to the ancient systems, which becomes more natural than anything else. I showed this diagram last time, so let's spend a little bit of time on this one. So here, and by the way, whether you put it up here or down here, it doesn't really matter. We are three-dimensional spatial beings living in time, or at least that's what we think we are. So sometimes we like to draw things this way or that way, but it really doesn't matter. At the depth of existence is this I-ness, which in ancient Sanskrit terms was called Satchitanandam. It has three aspects: being, the foundation of being; awareness, chitti; and ananda, the bliss. All three are needed. All three are the holy triad, which is so prevalent in so many religions. The Trinity. They're not separate from each other. We just give them different names. They're all part of the I-ness. But that I-ness, again, we're born with it from the very beginning. We don't have to prove it. But what is the greatest in the universe? The self. We always put it down. We always ignore it. And we become bound beings, human beings, because we ignore it. It's always there for us. Through the object-subject split, apparent split, which is based on universal principles, which I will say a few words about it, and at a deep level of mathematics, perhaps that's what Plato was talking about, and I think actually Roger Penrose is also hinting about it at a very deep level, these mathematical principles. Fundamental mathematics, it appears as it causes a split. Eventually, you get the pre-space-time, pre-Planck level, and eventually space-time arises. Space-time is not fundamental. The intellect, the ego, the mind, through the mind we create histories of the universe, theories of the universe. And then we have systems. We study our relationships. And up here we have scientific views of the universe. So this is, if you like, the systems approach. I think we heard a couple of days ago a brilliant talk about the systems approach to consciousness. Relationships. Another way to view this is now starting from the top. Again, I'm trying to emphasize that it's not top or bottom. It's simultaneous. There's no beginning, there's no end. It's just it. It's just that. Undivided consciousness, how does she create the universe? Or he creates the universe? And again, the division between male and female is at a certain relative level. These are words we use, but they don't really capture reality. How does I-ness create the universe? By the appearance of a split between the subject and the object, by projecting. And the great Shaivite masters talked about that, and I will say a few words about it. through assuming limitations. Universal consciousness assumes limitations. Otherwise, it will be universal consciousness. There will be no universe. And some of these principles, in fact, I believe there are three of them, fundamental. Subhash Kak and myself spent a couple of hours, a couple of nights ago, discussing them, and he actually helped me understand that the set of these fundamental principles is smaller rather than larger. So we're going to go through them, but universal complementarity seems to be really at the core, and recursion, patterns that appear again and again and again. And meaning. Without meaning, the universe has no meaning. It has to have meaning. And again, then I show, as I showed in the previous slide, you get these splits, disappearance, and eventually the intellect, the ego, and the mind. And in the East and the West, we love the mind. We revere the mind. The mind is everything. If you lose your mind, you lose everything, right? Doesn't matter what possessions you have. If you lose your mind, you lose everything. Indeed, the mind is so important, but it's also a limiting agent because it projects views of reality and makes them appear as real. And we get caught in our own nets of our mind. And it's very difficult to get out of those nets of our mind. We take them as real. And one day, we're gone. The mind is gone. So what happened to that net? Well, the mind is nothing more than a reflection of universal consciousness. But be careful, because you can be entrapped by it. Psychosomatic elements, what John von Neumann talked about as in principle fundamental to Copenhagen interpretation, and eventually the universe. In this view, the universe is derived. The universe and consciousness are not really different from each other. It's just that we, by projecting the universe out, we view it as the only real thing. But truly speaking, what do we have that is always with us from day one? Think about it. What else do we have? I would like to, just for a second, we're not going to do many exercises. Again, Deepak is going to guide us through a number of them. And you don't have to close your eyes. Just stop for a second and consider this identity of yours. Whatever it is, just become aware of your own awareness. It's really very simple. It's always there. You can be seeing objects, you can fall asleep, but that awareness is always there. Qualia. We are at the forefront of a major revolution. Yes, you heard it here. It's a new science of qualia. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But qualia comes from the Latin term quale, which is the subjective experience. The pain of a headache, the taste of wine, the feeling of touch, everything that's familiar to us but we tend to ignore. The color red. Where does the color red come from? It comes from sensory perception, that is projection of consciousness onto consciousness. If we didn't have eyes, we would not have perception of red. Actually, blind people can still have perception of color, although I presume they don't really perceive it the same way as we do. And I used last time the example of Ganymede, one of the satellites of Jupiter that has, I believe that's correct, I need to check my astronomy, but I think that's correct. It has a huge ocean covered with ice. It is possible that in the depths of Ganymede there are sentient beings. If they do exist, their perception of reality will be totally different. I can guarantee you that. They will have not seen the light of the sun. They were never going to see the light of the sun. And in fact, through the gravitational forces from Jupiter, one could have an energy source that they could use because life needs a source of energy. But their perceptions would definitely not be the same as ours. We can, in the eye of our mind, we can think about that. Erwin Schrödinger said that the sensation of color cannot be accounted for by the physicist's objective picture of light waves. This is the father, or one of the main fathers of quantum theory. Could the physiologist account for it? I do not think so. Erwin Schrödinger. So here is, in a cartoon fashion, is the science of qualia, undivided wholeness, subject-object split. Qualia is everything else, including mathematical formulae that we create. We mathematical physicists love mathematical formulae. We love them, right? Einstein actually talked about it. For him, the God of Spinoza was nothing more than the God of rationality and mathematics, pure mathematics. It's a qualia. It is. Now, we have taken mathematics, we have put it out there, and said mathematics exists by itself. Yes, mathematics exists by itself, as Plato said. But it also exists in us. Biology, astronomy, Earth system science, classical world, quantum world, are all perceptions of subjective experience. We have written an article with Deepak and Rudy Tanzi in the San Francisco Chronicle, and we said, from quanta to qualia, you can Google it, you can read it. Quanta are packets of energy. Qualia are qualities. Qualia are the everyday qualities of experience: light, sound, color, shape, texture. In fact, what we call SIFT: sensation, image, feeling, thought. Anything we experience is one of those. Can you think of anything that is not one of these four aspects? Qualia science shows how the conscious universe operates, active participatory role of consciousness through the operation of qualia. What, in fact, John Archibald Wheeler talked about, that there is no phenomenon unless it is a registered phenomenon. The universe comes about because of innumerable acts of observation. And the quantum Zen effect has shown quite well that by many observations, you freeze into a path that then appears as reality. That's why quantum theory is so relevant. These universal principles, rather than trying to understand consciousness as an object, and ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee you this will never, never be accomplished. It will never happen. If you think that consciousness can be studied as an object, you are already in the world of division. We are separating consciousness from the contents of consciousness. So, rather than studying consciousness as an object of study, let's study the properties of consciousness. This is the best we can do. How it manifests in the universe. And the universe is not really different than consciousness. These properties of consciousness are tied to foundational principles I mentioned before, applying not just to the physical world studied by physical science, but to the mental and living worlds studied by noetic and biological sciences. Manifestation of principles is through the science that we call the science of qualia. The principles themselves are nothing more than condensed, if you like Sutras, condensed versions of qualia. So here's three principles. Complementarity seems to be fundamental to the universe. The reason we're entrapped in Western science is that, as again Subhash and I were talking about, we are tied to the idea of unity out there. The Godhead of Abraham and Christ, the Judeo-Christian idea of an external God that is a unity. The unity is paradoxical. The unity manifests as complementary relationships, sometimes contradicting each other. Watch out. Don't get entrapped in the contradictions. This is the nature of the dance of consciousness. She creates the universe by these principles that appear paradoxical. They are paradoxical. Understand that unity is in diversity. You can't get rid of diversity because it's part of the unity. The only way to get rid of the diversity is to reach the absolute aham level. I exist. There are several principles, but another fundamental principle seems to be recursion. What is out there, it's also in here. By studying the universe, you can study yourself. By studying yourself, you can study the universe. And finally, contextuality and meaning. The universe is meaningful. If it was not meaningful, it would be a dead universe. And this is what really boggles my mind, is that we now have theories about the universe where one only out of 10 to the 500, 10 to the 500, it's a huge number, is our universe. The rest of them are dead, stillborn universes. This is what superstring theory leads us to believe. Now, it's not that universal consciousness cannot create 10 to the 500 universes. She can create an infinity of universes. But let's not substitute one for the other. And, in fact, I'm sort of interested in the work of Ahem and Roger Penrose because it seems that they provide a different twist to this idea of why are these coincidences, why are the fundamental constants seem to be so unique? Perhaps there's cycles of time. But let's leave that aside. I think we have experts in the audience that we can discuss that more with them. So the basic point here is that we have complementary relationships through recursion at every level, provide meaning to the universe through these relationships. Vidya-mitra Vijna Hridayam, Sutra number 1. I think I went through that. We're not going to go through too many of them. I'm going today to just cover 3 of them. Chidiga Svatantra, Vishva Siddhi Heduhu. The Sanskrit terms are there. Universal consciousness, in her infinite freedom, brings about the attainment of the universe. Another way to interpret this, because each sutra has multiple meanings, and you can write books and books of expositions, and in fact many of the Shaivite masters did just exactly that, out of one sutra. The universe is the means to attain the realization of supremely free universal consciousness, and supreme independent universal consciousness is the cause of manifestation, maintenance, and reabsorption of the universe. The final cause and the initial cause is Chidihi, universal consciousness. There is no material substance. Material substance is Chidihi. Our perceptions of reality are Chidihi. We, as Chidihi, can also be free of circumstances. We can also be entrapped by her infinite power. Maya. I was always struck in the Lord's Prayer, because I come from the Christian tradition, it says, and do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us of evil. What does that mean? Christ, who is supposed to be, of course, the all-encompassing Godhead, asks us to pray that we're not led into temptation. We can become entrapped by our own minds. Entrapment. It's not entrapment because some agency, some secret agency entraps us. That happens too, but it is our own minds. This is Sutra number 1. And the 5 actions of Paramashiva, or Supreme Shiva, are creation, sustenance, destruction. They're associated, of course, with gods of the Hindu pantheon: Brahman, Vishnu, Shiva, or Maheshvara. Grace and concealment. You here in this fine institution, you know about grace. And if you know about grace, you also know about concealment. Sutra number 2. Svechaya svabhitau vishvam unmilayadim. I ask forgiveness from the great masters of Sanskrit, because my pronunciation is not exactly what it should be. But basically, it says, by the power of her own will, she unfolds the universe upon a part of herself. By the power of her own will, she unfolds the universe upon her own screen. She projects the universe on herself. It is a screen like this that is self-aware. You can't really, this is a separate screen. What John Archibald Wheeler tried to do by having the eye turn around and looking at itself, you cannot do that. Because this screen, if it's chitty, itself is self-aware. It projects on itself. So this is the play of universal consciousness. And in a way, jokingly, I can say the universe is smoke and mirrors. Indeed, it's nothing more than smoke and mirrors. But I don't want to dismiss it. I'm just saying, watch out for this entrapment, because it's really nothing more than a reflection. And last time, I read for you a great quote from Vanagupta, where he says, you can see in a reflection in a mirror a village, and you think the village is separate from the mirror, but the village and the mirror are the same. They appear to be different. Sutra number 3. Tan nana anurupa grahya grahaka vedat. That becomes diverse because of the division of reciprocally adapted objects and subjects. Complementarity. Sutra number 3 says, object-subject. Division arises in the interchange between objects and subjects. She projects the universe by creating the appearance of an objective reality out there. But out there is nowhere else than on her own being. Chitti projects the universe on a part of herself. The other, the object, is really me, the subject. Idam and aham are the same, although appears as separate from me through a mutual relation between the two. So object, subject, and the relationship between the two. This is what quantum theory says, the art of observation. Manifestation, Shiva Sutras, as here, so elsewhere. And we talked about last time the various tattvas. Don't get stuck on this number 36. It could be 34. It could be 80. It doesn't matter. They're really levels of projection. And at the pure level, which means where undivided consciousness exists, there's a play between the aham and the idam, but the two have not separated yet. And eventually, consciousness becomes the experience in subjects that projects out and appears to itself as separate from the universe. Levels of reality are tied to qualia. We went through this a little bit briefly. We're not going to do that today. This will take months of study in the Shaivite text. You can find it in some of Abhivana Gupta's, and of course also in Vedanta. But basically, in this aham level, it begins to appear as a separation. But the separation has not taken place yet. It's just the first throbbing of division. It actually is because you experience it yourself right as you awake, before you're fully awake, before this objective world comes to your senses. You have a sense of, I exist, oops, and you're awake. That is at 5 levels. At this level, as I mentioned last time, consciousness takes upon itself certain limitations, clocks. And from this point on, it's qualia all the way down. It's not elephants all the way down or turtles all the way down. It's qualia all the way down or all the way up. The self in Shiva is Paramashiva, Supreme Shiva, or Chiti, same thing. It's made up of 2 aspects, Prakasha and Vimarsa. Prakasha is the light or the being, and Vimarsa is the active conscious aspect. And of course in Vedanta, because they're not really different, they're the same. Vedanta is Brahman, is Sat Chit Ananda. Sometimes the Shaivites call it Chitananda, because the Sat is always there. So it's either Chitananda or Sat Chit Ananda or Prakasha and Vimarsa. And there it is. Prakasha, the metaphor, if you want to use the eye, that is self-aware, that projects back on itself, and Vimarsa creates the impression of the universe. Here is a quote from Dalai Lama, and I just wanted to put it up because it's cute. He's saying, we go through life and, what are we doing? Well, we try to get a lot of money, and we sacrifice our health to make money. Then we use the money, and it's actually quite funny if you think about it, to get health care and to take care of ourselves. And then we're so anxious about the future that we do not enjoy the present. We don't live into the future. We don't live into the past. We don't live into anywhere except anxiety. And in the end, we drop dead. And that's the predicament of life of a human being. Having never really lived. So perhaps these principles give us a way to live. I gave you the essence. Now we'll go through some of the specifics, and if we run out of time, we run out of time because you already got the basics. Complementarity is so fundamental to quantum measurement theory. The 2 aspects, the wave aspect and the particle aspect, they are not there at the same time. Paradox. Paradox. How can a particle be a wave? It cannot. It's a wave of probabilities, and it acquires specific properties upon observation. Once it acquires specific properties because of observation, it's not a wave anymore. Complementarity. The 2 aspects are always there, but they're not there at the same time. We talked about last time the Schrödinger-Cat paradox. It sort of opened the door to the noetic science. Not everything is a physical process. And I want to show you some of the numbers because it's quite fantastic, actually. Sir James Jeans called it knowledge waves. The wave function is actually describing knowledge waves. Where are the knowledge waves? In the mind. In consciousness. Knowledge waves presume knowledge. Remember the 3rd principle? Meaning. Knowledge. Knowledge requires somebody who knows. Not a purely physical thing, but a mind. If one were to maintain that only physical things exist, then you reach a very strange sense of reality. Reality is frozen into an infinity of possibilities. And in fact, there are quantum experiments now which show that indeed, before an observation, a nucleus, I think it's beryllium, is in the cat paradox. It's in both yes and no situations until an observation has been made, and then it collapses into one or the other. If you, though, insist that only physical entities exist, then you're driven to the conclusion of the multiple, almost infinite, maybe infinite, many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, which is actually really quite strange if you think about it. Two choices. There's two choices. Remember complementarity. Paradoxical. If the mathematics of quantum mechanics is right, as most physicists believe, and if only physical objects exist, one is forced to accept the multiple worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. That's why so many good physicists have gone down that path. Because they say their hidden ontology, or the philosophical assumption, is that the only thing that exists is external reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you, is that what you also think? Truly speaking, if you do, come out and say it. And then consciousness you're talking about is nothing more than an external object. Don't talk about consciousness, because the way I'm talking about consciousness is the fundamental I-awareness, not the subjective awareness of objects once the split has taken over. We've used the term consciousness many times, and it entraps us. If, on the other hand, you accept the more traditional understanding of quantum mechanics according to the Copenhagen interpretation and von Neumann, Henry Stapp, and others, one is led by its logical conclusion that not everything is physical and that there is something about the human mind that transcends matter in its laws. Two choices. Aspect experiment, spatial non-locality, temporal non-locality in the Wheeler delayed choice experiment, and now we have some very interesting experiments such as the experiment of Bohm, and others who actually show retrocausality. Well, again, be careful. It does mean that information is coming to the past from the future. It just means that the future and the past are coupled together through the act of observation. You cannot separate. The dance of a proton. You see, in these Feynman loops, a particle is not a hard object. It is a process. Quantum field theory and the superstring is nothing more than processes. Now, the fine-tuning problem. It is a huge embarrassment to Western science, to physics. And most physicists sweep it under the rug. I think people like Roger Penrose have thought about it, and they've decided to do something about it. Other people like Paul, Andrienne, Maurice, Dirac. These coincidences are very strange. At the Big Bang, the universe was flat to 1 part in 10 to the 50. This is flatness problem. The universe is remarkably homogeneous at large scales as seen by the black body, 3-degree black body radiation. This is the horizon problem. In fact, the biggest embarrassment is the value of its cosmological constant, because it's off. It is off by 10 to the 122 powers. Yikes. Quantum field theory is at odds with cosmology by that factor. Electrical forces, this is Dirac's observation, what's known as the large number hypothesis. The electric force, the gravitational force, is about 10 to the 40th. The size of the universe, what's known as the Hubble radius, divided by the elementary particle, is the same factor, 10 to the 40. Why should a ratio that comes from macrophysics be the same as the ratio from microphysics? Why? And the number of particles in the universe, which is known as Eddington's number, is the square of that number. The square root of that is the elementary particle size to the Planck length. There are these harmonic relationships. Now, this is something that boggles the mind. If the fine structure, which actually is responsible, it's a pure number, it's essentially 1 over 137 point something, was slightly off by 1%, we would not be here. Because the fine structure constant is responsible for the absorption of molecules of solar radiation in the atmosphere. And the sun happens to give, through this gravitational constant, to give the maximum of radiation in the right side part of the spectrum where the atmosphere of the Earth is transparent. We live around a star, a G2 star, that emits most of its radiation in the green-yellow part of the spectrum, and our eyes are adapted to that. If weak force were different by as little as 1%, there would be no supernova, no type 2 supernova explosions, which create, in the current cosmological paradigm, the heavy elements, and therefore it would not be here. These are great coincidences. And the list goes on and on and on. So the answer, this is a big embarrassment, right? You can say, well, it's all by chance, but in your God, you know that cannot be the case, right? It just cannot be. Consciousness drives designs the right way. This is my view. Consciousness, through this projection, self-driven by quantum process, rapidly enforcing choices that lead to optimal final results. We're going to have a quantum computer. We will. And that is going to be working through this quantum projection that out of an infinity of paths chooses the right one. And this is the only way that biological evolution makes any sense, because you cannot have, in the Hubble age of the universe, enough time through totally random processes to get the biology we see today. On the other hand, if you don't like that, you say, well, we live in a randomly picked universe that happens to be right. Nothing needs to be explained. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't like this point of view because that will put me out of business as a scientist. What really these scientists are saying is this is the end of science. There's nothing to explain. They should become poets or artists. And poets and artists actually probably have a better understanding of reality. Because then you live in an incredibly unlikely universe. Incredibly unlikely. Estimates from superstring theory are 1 over 10 to the 500. We just happen to be in the right one. And from a chaotic inflation theory, it's even more unbelievable. 1 over 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 7th power. This is chaotic inflation. We are incredibly lucky. I can tell you that this really proves nothing. It says nothing. And this is my most serious concern about this. And finally, of course, we heard so many great talks. Quantum effects in photosynthesis, quantum effects in the brain, in membranes, etc., etc. Biophoton, and of course, the quantum effects in photosynthesis that finally, I think, is taken seriously. It looks now, and this is my last slide. Yeah, this is, of course, the arguments in terms of McKinnon and Hammer, etc. It looks that we do have complementary biology, quantum biology, living universe, conscious universe. You can take it that way. Thank you.